The prevailing concept in academia right now about the five books of Moses is that they were um, a stitchwork of different writers. But I've been going on this exciting notion that the um, that it wasn't what the documentary hypothesis says it is. There weren't several different writers of the five books of Moses spread over several centuries. I think it was one authorial effort, and I've been working with Claude AI to develop that further into what I call my working thesis. Here, I want to share with you my latest and my overall concept, where I am right now. I want to turn this into a documentary. All right, so let's start with number one, the core claim. Elohim, now I should say Elohim is typically translated into English as God in the Bible that you probably have, and also in the Bible you have. It's likely that you see the Lord instead of Yud He Vav He. Um, Yud He Vav He, or transliterated into English, is YHVH. Those are the closest equivalent English letters to Yud He Vav He. We don't know for sure, or at least academia doesn't know for sure how to pronounce that name because the vowels are missing. But one thing I want to include in my documentary is my guess as to the correct pronunciation. Elohim, okay, number one core claim, Elohim and Yud He Vav He are not two gods and not just random editorial variation. Those are the two primary terms in the five books of Moses, and some events refer to Elohim as the actor. Other parts refer to Yud He Vav He as the actor. Sometimes they switch. It seems to be one character, and here's where I think academia, with the documentary hypothesis, has played its course, and it is wrong. It is not that one writer wrote an epic referring to God as Elohim, and a different writer wrote other stories referring to Yud He Vav He as the deity, and that the two somehow later on were edited together as a patchwork. As the documentary hypothesis says, I think that they're missing something fundamental about the nature of the author that's trying to convey this message. And I think people read the Torah, read the five books of Moses, and they lose sight of so much. First of all, they lose sight of the arc. I believe that the five books of Moses are really a story about Yud He Vav He trying to reestablish a connection with the descendants of Adam, with the Israelites. All right, so Elohim and Yud He Vav He are not two gods and not just random editorial variation. They're one deity deliberately split by a single author, and by single author I mean an authorial effort. I don't know for sure. There's no way of really demonstrating, at least not yet, how many authors were actually involved in the writing of the Torah, the five books of Moses. But I'll just say, for the sake of easy speech, it's one author. I mean, one authorial effort. They're one deity deliberately split by a single author into two literary theological registers. Elohim is representing function, order, and structural authority. Yud He Vav He, on the other hand, is about relationship, covenant, and tzedek, justice, conduct toward another party. So those are the two different focuses, and the author deliberately switches and uses Elohim when referring to function, a deity focused on function, order, and structural authority, and then other times uses Yud He Vav He as the name of the deity when talking about covenant, when talking about conduct toward another party, how you relate in society, how society as a whole should function. Okay, moving on to number 2, what Elohim actually means, deconstructing the translation. Elohim is grammatically plural, not a proper name, closer to a category word. Um, could be power holder and authority. Here's some proof. Elohim is also used for human judges. For example, Exodus 21, verse 6, 22, verses 7 to 8, and for other nations' gods, same word, no deity required. In here, it mentions human judge, as I said before. I think um, one of the examples referenced here talks about Yud He Vav He telling Moses that he meaning Moses, will be an Elohim to Pharaoh. So obviously, that means that Elohim could not unilaterally mean God. It's more, I'm guessing, more like an authority figure, power holder. Um, so this one, Moses as Elohim to Pharaoh, that's the part that I was talking about, and as Elohim to Aaron, functional, positional authority, not divinity. And by contrast, Yud He Vav He is a real proper name, never doubles as judge, never used for foreign gods. Grammar itself encodes the category particular distinction. All right. Genesis chapter 1. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, the only deity referred to is Elohim. Elohim is doing all the action. Um, now, there's one term, tov, which is typically translated into English as good, good and evil, which you'll see in the Garden of Eden story, the knowledge of good and evil. However, that's really a mistranslation. Tov, the Hebrew word tov, is not good in the sense of morality. It's more like functional fit. It's not moral judgment. As in, this works, this is functional, um, as opposed to dysfunctional. So my concept is that tov refers to something working well, something functionally working, and the opposite of that, raw, is it would not be evil. It would be something dysfunctional, something chaotic, something not working right. Um, sets up Elohim. So Genesis 1, and I'll go into this further. I've gone into this in other videos, but Elohim is establishing a cosmic order in chapter 1 by category, creating a creature. There's a cosmic order, there's a cosmic authority working here that you don't see in chapter 2 chapter 2 onward through the Garden of Eden story. You see the two of them together in an interesting way. In English translations, you see the Lord God, but totally misses the actual term. The actual term, it's lost in translation. The actual term you see is Yud He Vav He Elohim, which, if you see in English translations, of course, misses a lot of what my thesis is. All right, about the fruit, acquiring what I said before, the knowledge of, as in, what's said in English Bibles, good and evil. In the Garden of Eden story, it's about Adam and Eve acquiring the knowledge of Tov and Ra. In other words, what's functional, what works well, as opposed to what doesn't work well. It's opposite. So there's a verse here, Genesis chapter 3:22. Both Adam and Eve have eaten from the fruit. By the way, it's not an apple mentioned, it just said fruit. That came later with probably Greek translation, Septuagint, and so forth. It just says fruit. Yud He Vav He is very worried, or seems very worried that the man has eaten, and as it says in the verse, the man has become like one of us to know Tov and Ra. Um, and elsewhere in that same section, it says, become like Elohim, to know Tov and Ra. So what I'm catching here is that humans, at least Adam and Eve and then their descendants, explicitly gain Elohim's discernment ability to be able to understand the difference between the two. Um, so it's not really about morality as obedience. It's about acquiring the capacity to be able to discern between what's functional and not, which is an ability, of course, that up till this point only Elohim had, or Yud He Vav He Elohim. We get to the Cain and Abel story after that. I'm thinking that this is an immediate demonstration that um, discernment doesn't equal right use. In other words, Cain is the child of Cain and Abel, rather, are the children um, of Yud He Vav He. No, of It's interesting that line actually. It's Adam and Eve, but Eve is the one that begets the child, or children, Cain and Abel. And she says that I will name him Cain because I've acquired it says man child in English translations with Yud He Vav He. And then later on, she'll have another child after Abel is unalived, and Cain goes off as a nomad. She begets another child, only this time she says, I have acquired a seed from Elohim. So notice the difference you actually miss in English translations. So um, she like got Cain and Abel with the help of Yud He Vav He, and then later on she gets a seed directly from, or I shouldn't say directly from, but it says she got a seed from Elohim. So there are two different terms there. The Cain and Abel story, it's a demonstration that discernment of what's functional and not functional doesn't equal right use. In other words, correct use. That relates to Yud He Vav He, perhaps in terms of how people should conduct each other, how someone should conduct themselves with someone else. That's more ethical. And there, appropriately enough, in that Cain and Abel story, it's Yud He Vav He dominating the story, because it's not about function, order, structural authority. It's more about justice. It's more about how you should deal with another person communally, societally, with ethics, and so forth. Um, so Yud He Vav He's warning to Cain, chapter 4, verse 7, that sin is and sin is not. Don't think of sin. Don't place the Christian concept of sin onto this and original sin and so forth. Sin. The Hebrew word for sin is chet, and it's. I've been told it's an archery term, but it means moving off the correct path. You want to get back onto the correct path. And I've also noticed in these verses and chapters in the 5 books of Moses, um, especially in this beginning part, the concept of walking. You have Adam and Eve hiding from Yud He Vav He Elohim as he's walking through the garden. Later on, you'll see that Elohim was no more because well, I don't want to say no more because um, Enoch, sorry, um, Enoch's immediate predecessors each died. They lived a certain amount of years, and then they begat a child, and then afterwards they they lived another number of years, and then they died. Um, However, in that list of 10, Enoch is the only one that it says doesn't or didn't die. He walked with Elohim. There's that concept of walking, and you'll see later on walking plays a big role in what Yud Hey Vav Hey is eventually going to try to establish with the Israelites um, through the course of the 5 books. The remaining 4 books. Well, really, after the Garden of Eden story and the first few stories, about starting from Abram on, he will be trying to establish some kind of relationship. I'm going to get to that. So anyway, back to the warning, Yud Hey Vav Hey's warning to Cain. Um, Sin crouches at the door, but Yud Hey Vav Hey tells Cain, you must master it, or you can master it. Capacity requires check. Then we get to so Cain becomes a nomad, leaves, and then we get to the Tower of Babel story. So you know about the Tower of Babel story, right? Um, this is before the flood. The inhabitants of the land gather together and they say, let us make a tower to heaven, so that we will have ourselves a name and we won't be scattered across the earth, across the land. So they build the tower. Yud Hey Vav Hey sees the tower being built. Evidently, as we can surmise, he becomes worried. He scatters their language so they can't talk with each other, and thus you get the term babbling. They can't understand each other's language. Splits, they were of one language, now they're of many different languages. So their effectiveness at working together has been disrupted. So I thought about that. Coordinated language. Think back to functional and dysfunctional. They have already acquired, it's not like they've lost that ability to discern between Tov and Ra, like Elohim. There's no reference to having lost that ability. So we can presume that these descendants still have that ability, like God, like Elohim, to be able to discern functionality. Like, this is a hammer, it's good for construction. This is good for chopping wood. This is good for they can develop tools and machinery. They can figure out what works and what doesn't work. And um, as I'm saying in this, I'm saying that Yud Hey Vav Hey has a growth. He's not perfect. He's not all omniscient, and that's one of the revolutionary ideas I'm introducing into this documentary. It's a learning curve. It's a growth of Yud Hey Vav Hey as he changes his mind over the course of the 5 books of Moses. He learns, he develops, and it becomes a partnership, kind of a partnership. It becomes a growth on his part and a growth on the Israelites' part later on. Um, So, coordinated language, engineering, ambition, Tov and Ra, discernment in full operation, several generations post Eden. So, meaning basically for several generations after Eden, they're about 9, no, they're about 10 until the flood, which does come. Um, Yud Hey Vav Hey acts as the moral register. So, again, instead of Elohim, or in contrast to Elohim, where you have a discernment ability between what works and what doesn't work. Physically, you have Yud Hey Vav Hey, which in some sense embodies can discern what works and what doesn't work in terms of human relation. You have more of a sense of justice. Um, Yud Hey Vav Hey is the one who intervenes. Judgment on pride, self-elevation, not a structural violation. Now, I had Claude AI structure this list, piece together what I had been sharing with it and discussing with it, in terms of my ideas, and I had it create a list. So I may pause here and disagree with how Claude AI phrased some of these. I'm not sure about pride or self elevation at that point. All right, on to the flood. Yud Hey Vav Hey. At this point, this is very interesting. Okay, you have Yud Hey Vav Hey. It's like two separate stories, and this is much of the documentary hypothesis. It says that there were different writers. One writer using Yud Hey Vav Hey as its term for his or her term for God, and Elohim the Elohist writer using Elohim as a different term for God, and that somewhere later on, the two were stitched together. So they both the documentary hypothesis poses that or posits that there were two that each of those two epics had a flood story, or that one modified the other one's story. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there was one writer who wrote about, or a single authorial effort, who wrote one flood story, but Yud Hey Vav Hey and Elohim are fluctuations in terms of the focus. It's like the deity sometimes puts on the Yud Hey Vav Hey mask, and sometimes puts on the Elohim mask, depending on what the focus of what his or her, what the deity's focus is at that moment. So we have two different kinds of stories, which again, documentary hypothesis thought to be two different stories. Yud Hey Vav Hey sees every imagination of the heart in the atom being raw, as opposed to, the raw, not the English word raw, but the Hebrew term raw, meaning dysfunctional and chaotic. It's an interior relational register, decides to destroy. So Yud Hey Vav Hey is deciding to destroy the earth, get all my creation, get rid of it. Simultaneously, in that same portion, you see the sons of the Elohim coming down and mating with the daughters of the Atom, and then begetting, as you may have already heard, the Nephilim. So that's very bad. So clearly, Elohim being focused on cosmic order, and focused on cosmic order, would see this as a tainting. In other words, they should not be mating together. Therefore, the population that has resulted ought to be wiped out. They've been tainted. They've been corrupted physically. Not talking spiritually or morally. They've physically been corrupted. Whereas Yud Hey Vav Hey has seen that his creation, the Atom, and you can read into that the descendants of Adam are not something about their heart. The mind at that time was believed to be in the heart. Every imagination is dysfunctional. So you have two different stories during the flood, and then so you have two different reasons for the deity to use the flood to wipe everybody out. However, we get to Noah, who's like the savior of that population. Genesis 6:9 describes Noah as being Tamim, and that he walked with Elohim. Tamim is a term that means completion, wholeness, being complete. And I am going out, probably not too far on a limb, I suspect, in thinking that Tamim referring to correct completion and wholeness refers to Noah being capable of both the Tov and Ra aspect of Elohim, or the ability to discern between Tov and Ra that Elohim has, and the moral sense of justice and how to relate to one's fellow man, um, that Yud He Vav He embodies. Um, the argument Tamim holding both qualities at once: functional, structural soundness, Elohim, and proto Yud He Vav He. This is why Noah the story needs. So, so it's interesting in the so when in the construction of the ark, the instructions, you have primarily Elohim giving the instructions to how to build the ark, and appropriately, he says, take two of every animal, every kind of animal, obviously male and female, so that they can repopulate. Um, and then Yud He Vav He jumps in. He says, take seven of the clean animals. And by clean, I presume this refers to kosher. What's termed kosher? Later on in Leviticus, you see precisely which animals in the Jewish religion are kosher, meaning these animals are okay for eating. These animals are not good for eating, are not appropriate, I should say, for eating. So he's Yud He Vav He steps in and says, take seven of the clean animals. So remember, he's Yud He Vav He is thinking about the commandments, the covenant, how you relate to your fellow man, and so forth. Whereas Elohim is referring to cosmic order. So through much of it, Elohim says, take two of every animal, male and female. Okay, physical. It's simple biology, repopulation, and Yud He Vav He steps in and says, take seven of the clean animals, covenantally clean, kashrut, so forth. All right, Genesis 17, the hinge chapter. So now we get to Abram. Abram is a descendant of a descendant of a descendant, all the way back after the flood. Yud He Vav He opens as El Shaddai. The text says Yud He Vav He, but he tells Abram, I am El Shaddai. Walk with me. Here we walk with me and be Tamim. So we've already had one character who's Tamim. That's Noah, which I am suspecting refers to the ability to have traits, or ability to have skill or talent to be able to interpret or discern between um, Tov and Ra, as Elohim does, and that moral register that Yud He Vav He has. Um, Narration shifts to Elohim mid chapter. So it's going between the two of them, depending on, as I said before, depending on context. Yud He Vav He tells Abram, walk before me, be Tamim, be whole, be complete. It's an imperative. Relational contrast, Enoch's passive walked with. This is more of a focus. Claude picked up on this, whereas Noah and Enoch had a passive walked with Elohim. Here, he's telling Abram, Yud He Vav He is telling Abram, walk before me. It's more imperative. Um, there's a circumcision covenant. We've already had, we have three through the text of this. We have three, I shouldn't say covenants really. It's referred to as covenants. There are three markers. After the flood, this is an excellent example of Yud He Vav He actually changing his mind. There's a growth arc here. Yud He Vav He, I believe it actually says he creates a rainbow. But anyway, after the flood, there's a rainbow, and Yud He Vav He hope I'm using the correct term. I don't think it's Elohim. I think it's Yud Hey Vav Hey. Uh, tells Noah, um, this rainbow will be a sign of my promise. It's not unilateral. Yeah, I guess it's unilateral. It's a promise by him not to destroy his creation with a flood, with water. No, it's interesting that Noah doesn't have any part in this. Um, it's a promise on the deity's part not to destroy the flood, destroy with a flood again. And you'll see that again. There's another promise here with Abram um, to give him land. It's not as I would call it, a covenant. You have two signatory parties. Abram is not a signatory party. It's the deity promising that if they, well, I suppose you do. I guess it's kind of a signatory. If the if Abram and his people will perform circumcisions on their children, or on the bodies of Abram and his kin, will circumcise themselves. Um, that Yud Hey Vav Hey will grant them this land. And that's very straightforward. I like that. It's very straightforward. Um, it says here, argue this is the deliberate transition point from universal cosmic to particular covenantal. Bonus, Melchizedek, and that's the correct pronunciation. It's Melchizedek. This tzedek is the word for justice, and Melchi would mean king. Could be translated as my king is justice, or this anyway. Melech is king. E would mean my, could mean my, or it could indicate the king has a trait of justice, of having justice. Melchizedek as a third name, El Elyon data point. Abram explicitly folds into Yud Hey Vav Hey, foreshadowing the universalizing move. That's detracting a little bit. Okay, let's move on. Sodom or Sodom. Yud Hey Vav Hey executes judgment, personal relational wickedness register. Elohim is credited in the summary, cosmic order, remembering register. The same act, two names, two functions, hard evidence against just separate. It's hard evidence against somebody just saying, oh, they're just two separate sources. This has very different context in these two different verses. They're very different context. And so I'm suspecting the author used those two different names because they're two different purposes, two different contexts. All right. Okay, so Exodus 20, chapter 20, verse 11. Genesis 1, creation. It's pure Elohim. That's the only deity being referred to. Then at the Sabbath commandment, I presume this is the Sabbath commandment. It would be the Decalogue. This would be the Decalogue right here. When they're on Mount Sinai, or at least the Mount Sinai, Moses coming down from the mountain and so forth, and the Decalogue. You will not da da da. I am your God. Blah blah blah. Who brought you out of Egypt to be your God? Blah blah blah. The Sabbath commandment, Yud Hey Vav Hey, retroactively claims authorship of that same creation act. In other words, there are two different purposes for having the Sabbath, that commandment of observing the Sabbath. In Genesis chapter 1, it says that Elohim created basically the universe in 6 days and then rested on the seventh day. So should we rest on the seventh day, the Sabbath. However, in this Exodus portion, Yud Hey Vav Hey, not Elohim, but Yud Hey Vav Hey says that The Sabbath is to commemorate the escape from Egypt. It's interesting. Confirms the technique isn't a one-off Sodom, it's a repeated authorial strategy. Again, it's not just switching between two names arbitrarily. There's a pattern to it between the two use of the two names. All right, here's the meat of this, the growth arc of Yud Hey Vav Hey, increasing presence. This will be the bulk of my documentary. Post-flood, near total withdrawal, regret, meaning Yud Hey Vav Hey after the flood, nearly entirely, almost entirely withdraws from his creation. He has regret. He's seen the wickedness and the dysfunctionality of his creation. The patriarchs recurring, "I will be with you." He says to, I think he says also to Abram, but Abram's son Isaac and then Isaac's son Jacob, he says, "I will be with you." And think about that for a moment. Before, he had created the flood to wipe everybody out, and now he's choosing Abram of all people for whatever reason I should get into at some point. He picks Abram and he says, "No, no, no, I will not abandon you." Don't think about that as some flaky cliche term. I won't abandon you. I will be with you. I won't, destroy you. I won't just walk away and abandon you. Exodus chapter 3, Yud Hey Vav Hey's name itself becomes Ehyeh, I will be. You've probably heard of the phrase Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, or certainly the English translation, I will be who I will be, or I am who I am, however you translate it. It's more accurately, I will be who I will be, because, of course, this is a transliteration of the Hebrew, but the at the beginning refers to first person, meaning I, and this yeah refers to being, future, and the fact that this I is placed at the beginning makes it future tense. So it means I will be. And Asher means which or that or who. I will be who I will be. Moses persuades Yud Hey Vav Hey to dwell among the people. Ark culminates in the ark, tabernacle. So in the Exodus story, and I hope that this gets into it further, but in case it doesn't, I want to mention here that you have the mountaintop and you have Yud Hey Vav Hey, which has made who has made strides in at least trying to work with the Israelites, his creation, the Israelites. Instead of abandoning them, he now descends in a cloud to talk with Moses up on the top of the mountain. And there's a famous phrase about, don't look, you cannot see my face and live, and so forth. Yud Hey Vav Hey is hiding, perhaps similar in the sense as Adam and Eve were hiding. Remember in the Garden of Eden story, Adam and Eve were hiding from Yud Hey Vav Hey Elohim as he was walking through the garden. So I'm looking at this all from the point of view of a screenwriter. A screenwriter would open up with a story. There's a pivotal moment that begins, that breaks the balance of things, creates a problem, and then what are the events? How is this problem resolved? So you have Yud Hey Vav Hey at the top, emerging from a cloud, speaking on top of the mountain. The Israelites are down below. So he's hidden from the Israelites below. He's also hidden himself from, in fact, I think he says he will use his hand, or he hides himself with his hand from Moses' presence so that Moses will not become unalived. But I think also in there that he's doing it because he's hesitant to merge so much with his creation, the Israelites. Frame this explicitly as a developing relationship, not a static deity. The text tracks Yud Hey Vav Hey moving toward closeness. Okay, so you get to Sinai. Commandments as synthesis. 50-day gap. So you have between Exodus and Mount Sinai, you have 50 days. That's 7 times 7 plus 1. I won't go into that, but 7 times 7 is 49 plus 1 equals 50. And there's an equidistant letter sequencing pattern that exists in the beginning of each book. And it gets into chiasmus. Basically, you count if you take the beginning of each book, you count starting with a certain letter and you count every 50 letters, it spells out Torah, which is the term for the 5 books of Moses, Torah. And 50 appears in other places too. You have the 7 days of creation. You have the 7 years. This is a jubilee cycle. The 50th year is a jubilee cycle described in, I think it's Leviticus. So I won't go into that further. But the Israelites are commanded to count the Omer that are, I believe it's dropped. That's manna? Unless they're the same thing. Anyway, no, they're not the same thing. But anyway, count the Omer. I don't think this really happened historically. I think this is an author's epic that has a lot of symbolism, as you can see here. Okay, moving on. The plagues function as full witness spectacle, so revelation lands as internalized, not superficial. Yes, going back to the plagues, I kind of don't like the way Claude organized these talking points, but if you go to chaver.com, chaver.com, Moshe Klein has written a book and presents articles and so forth on that website about a visual layout that would be hidden if you're just reading it linearly. There are two ways of reading the 5 books of Moses: linearly as a succession of 5 books, or visually as a layout of units. And I should mention, well, I'll mention it now in case this doesn't cover it later on. He found 86 precise units, and there are clues in the text to hint at how the units are to be divided, and you can see parallels so that you find a structural map of the 86 units. Now, I should mention what gematria is. Gematria is a method of adding up the values of each letter in a word or a name to get the total value, the total numerical value. And if you add up the values, the numerical values of the letters Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, you get 26. If you add up the numerical values of the letters in the name Elohim, you get 86. And considering Elohim is involved with cosmic order, more physicality and cosmic order, it makes total sense that the author would have also laid out enough units to equal the gematria value of Elohim. So anyway, going back to the plagues. So you have 2 stories here. You have the plagues in Exodus, all 10 plagues, and then you have the 7 days of creation. Now, Moshe Klein goes into this much, much further through illustration. And if you go to his YouTube channel, Moshe Klein, or is it Mel Klein? Kline, you will see that the plagues are an inverse of the 7 days of creation. And there's much more to it than that, but there are patterns in how, remember what I said before, Klein's physical model, layout model, on different levels of depth. Rows, it's a matrix. It's a matter of matrix of rows and columns and patterns that you see in the plagues. So there's a point during the plagues when Yud He Vav He says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that the Israelites will know that I am Yud He Vav He. Now, I don't think this is just grandiose braggadocio. um, I believe that's a cue to the reader, um, for those readers who are able to pick up the hidden pattern, the hidden visual layout pattern of the plagues, that requires an understanding of these rows and columns and patterns. And that's like a sign. That's Yud Hey Vav Hey telling the reader, you shouldn't interrupt, you shouldn't ignore parts of this pattern. In other words, you shouldn't ignore some of these plagues because you must read about all 10 plagues occurring. So I will not harden Pharaoh's heart. In other words, I will not suddenly stop the story. I will not abbreviate the story in any way. You must see the full, you must read the full story so you can catch the full pattern. Um, the Decalogue, direct address, no mediation, maximum divine proximity. All right, there are 5 codes. Right, that leads into the next part. There's a sequence of 5 codes. It's not just the 10 commandments. At the very beginning, chapter 20 of Exodus, you have the Decalogue. Then a little bit later on, I think it's the same chapter, you have further commandments referred to as the covenant code, then the priestly code after that, and then the holiness code, and then in Deuteronomy there's a Deuteronomic code, which is different from the retelling of the Decalogue, which, in a different form. So you have a retelling of the Decalogue and a Deuteronomic code, both in Deuteronomy. There's a pattern to this. It's a descent. There's direct address in the story of the Decalogue, and then you may remember Moses cracks the. Okay, you may remember the Decalogue is first inscribed literally from or by Yud Hey Vav Hey's finger, and then those are cracked, and then there's a second set created. So you're one step away from direct divine intervention. Trace this sequence as a stage descent, direct address here, and then casual cause and effect type of commandments, and then a sequence of priestly command. This would be the cause and effect style of commandments, and then this is a priestly code, sanctuary mechanics, and then the holiness extended to the whole people at the very end. So there's a sequence here. Commandments themselves blend both registers, order structure, that's Elohim content, and structure and social conduct, justice, Yud Hey Vav Hey content into a single code. Meaning basically in this code you have both Elohim type content referring to order and structure, and you have social conduct, justice type stuff, which would refer to Yud Hey Vav Hey, but it's in a single code. Post Torah arc in Numbers. So you have here the arc of Yud Hey Vav Hey. Numbers, Yud Hey Vav Hey persuading the people toward faith to take the land. So, at the very end, I forgot to mention. So, Moses argues with Yud Hey Vav Hey. At some point, the Israelites have been testing him and testing him. I'm just going to abandon this people. I'm just going to select another group of people. And Moses says, no, 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 you must keep faith. Stick by your people, stick with your people. And Yud Hey Vav Hey changes his mind. So there's a real partnership there's a partnership in the sense of an overall goal. That the two are in this. Moses plus the Israelites and Yud Hey Vav Hey are in this through thick and thin. They must both partner with each other until the very end, until the goal is accomplished. So, Yud Hey Vav Hey, in some sense, says, okay, fine. And he sticks with them. And then he seems to express what I think is more optimism. Okay, Now, I want at some point he goes from, "Oh, this is utterly ridiculous. They've been testing me. They've been frustrating me. I've just had it with these people." To, with Moses' help, to a point where he says, "Okay, I don't know if I can directly, intimately coexist with you, but here's how you can do it. Build me an ark. Build me a mercy seat on top of the ark. Here are the instructions. Have two cherubim, which are, it's not sure what they are. They have four wings. They are more like, as I've seen, four-legged. This is in Middle Eastern iconography. Kind of like four-legged, perhaps human-headed, bearded creatures, one on either side of the mercy seat, both bowing down to the mercy seat. So the mercy seat would be where Yud He Vav He can sit, and I can't remember the exact line, but it's something very close to "so that I may dwell with them," them meaning the Israelites. Um, so where am I in here? Okay, so at the end of Exodus, it says that that Yud He Vav He then descends from the cloud to inhabit the Ark of the Covenant. So that's a real stretch. That's a real journey, right? From going from somewhere up in the clouds and just descending to not even let Moses talk with him, just being on the mountain away from the Israelites, to now dwelling amongst the Israelites, his people. Okay, angel of Yud He Vav He. Oh, did I miss? No, no, sorry. So then jumping forward after Deuteronomy, those are the 5 books of Moses, and I won't get into it now, but there's evidence to say the 5 books are one set, was written as one set. But then you go further. I was wondering, why is Joshua introduced in Deuteronomy as a successor to Moses, and then later on after the Torah, after the 5 books of Moses, you have Joshua. The whole book is named Joshua. You have him accomplishing what they had set out with for taking the promised land, Israel. That I think ties back to the Garden of Eden story. I think as they're standing there at Mount Moab, or in the region of Moab, looking out, gazing out at the land the promised land they're about to take. Deuteronomy just simply stops there. A screenwriter would continue. It's odd. It's like you're kind of encouraged to keep reading past the Torah into the next set. And I think that the Torah was written as like volume 1, grand volume 1, and Joshua to Kings was written as like grand volume 2. And Joshua is that linkage between them, that character that serves as a linkage between them. So it's a plausible, unified sequel composition. This parallels the real scholarly Deuteronomistic history thesis cited. In other words, I'm not the only one to suggest that Joshua to Kings was possibly written as one large collection of books, just like the Torah, the 5 books of Moses was one collection, written as one collection of books. You get the conquest, and then Judges. So after Joshua, and I won't go into this long, after Joshua, they take the promised land. Okay, now they have a land which is promised to them by Abram, by Yud He Vav He to Abram. So, okay, so that goal is accomplished. Then they get Judges, a sequence of Judges with mixed success, and then they get Kings with mixed results, and then they have exile. They have a series of kings, and then, of course, the Babylonians come in, and there you get the Babylonian exile. They're conquered and driven away. Flags this as the outer edge of current research, not yet fully worked out, of course, because I've been focusing on the Torah. Angel of Yud He Vav He, a diagnostic for the state of the relationship. Untested but developing. The term does not uniformly mean separation. it splits into two distinct uses across the text. So what I'm saying, basically, I don't know what Claude has mentioned here, but I can tell you what I've shared, and then we'll go through the text here. What I shared was my idea that several times you don't see Yud Hey Vav Hey acting directly as a participant or Elohim. You see an angel of, and here's some etymology. Angel comes from the Greek agalos, which means messenger. So it's not necessarily a divine messenger, although in certain contexts you can tell it's a divine messenger. It's not somebody with wings. It's not a little baby cherub or something. It's not. And by the way, cherub is not a little baby. It's more of one of those gruesome creatures, four-legged creatures. Um, it's a messenger, like a court or kingship. So if you think of Yud Hey Vav Hey as having a host of characters and the messenger, so forth. So I'm wondering if the use of a messenger speaking on behalf of Yud Hey Vav Hey or on behalf of Elohim is along the lines of that sense of separation. Where Yud Hey, remember I was talking about Yud Hey Vav Hey at first being very separate, wanting to be very separate, being pessimistic perhaps about the ability to coexist with his creation, essentially after the flood and before that, the wickedness of man is evil, is destructive and dysfunctional and so forth. Um, so perhaps he's using messengers, and then if I'm correct, perhaps over time the phrase "angel of" will vanish. All right, so that's what I shared with Claude, that idea, and then Claude looked up texts to search through the text to find evidence to back up my point. Bucket, general mediation, no rupture. Hagar. So these are the different examples that it found. The burning bush, so forth. Burning bush, of course, is early on before the Exodus. It's with Moses. So that might align with my idea that that Yud Hey Vav Hey was using a messenger. No, no, I'm not going to go in. I'm hesitant. I'm reluctant to go in, interact with these people. I don't know if it'll do any good, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to send my angel instead, my messenger instead. And then over time he changes. No, you know what? Build an ark, build a mercy seat on the ark. I want to dwell so that I may dwell with my people. That's a big character change. Um, all right, key controlled. Okay, rupture, specific downgrade or judgment post golden calf. I will not go up in the midst of thee, lest I consume you. Angel explicitly offered as a lesser substitute. I would consume you. I'm going to change. I'm going to send a messenger, angel, as a lesser substitute. Of course, Moses says, "No way, nope, I reject that." Um, Angel executes judgment, then stayed by mercy. I'll have to go into that further, study that on myself further, on my own further. Key controlled comparison. Exodus. My angel. My name is in him. So he says he's going to send an angel. Um, my name is in him, which I guess means, he goes on my authority. He acts on my authority. Full presence pre-calf, and then that chapter verses Exodus 33, an angel name clause dropped, diminished presence post-calf, same author, same device, two relational states. The term's weight tracks the covenant's condition at that moment. Let me see. Likely root, here we go, the cheruvim or cherubim. Likely root, Akkadian karabu, to bless, pray, karibu, intercessory, guardian spirits in Mesopotamian religion, positioned at thresholds and thrones, mediating access to the deity, which makes sense if you have cheruvim, two cheruvim bowing down with the mercy seat between them, mercy seat for Yud Hey Vav Hey to sit in between them. Functional function is proximity as guardianship, not simply nearness as an abstract meaning. Because sometimes I've read of cheruvim as meaning nearness, perhaps in English, perhaps in Hebrew, keruv. I think I remember reading that in Hebrew, keruv refers to nearness. I'll have to check on that. Eden's exit, cherubim placed east of the garden with a flaming sword, sealing the way back to the tree of life. And I noticed that here, they're cherubim placed east of the garden. They're guarding the way back to the tree of life in the garden. And it's interesting that you have cherubim on the ark, which is serving in some sense as a reparation for that separation that occurred with Adam and Eve and Yud He Vav He in the Garden of Eden story. So the entire five-book epic of, five books of Moses, I see as being a character arc on Yud He Vav He's part, and also some way of repairing what happened at the beginning of the story. Like if you're watching a movie, something startling happens at the beginning that causes a problem. So for the rest of the movie, you're trying to fix it. So here, something happens at the beginning, the Garden of Eden story. They eat from the fruit of the of knowledge of or discernment between functionality and dysfunctionality, and then that causes them to recognize they're naked, and then of course there's a separation with Yud He Vav He, or from Yud He Vav He. The mercy seat. I will meet with you from between the two cherubim. It's Yud He Vav He talking with, I think it's Moses or the Israelites, but I'm pretty sure it's Moses. All right, so and then I get to some historical footnotes. As you can tell, there's probably clapping right now because I'm at the end of this. I'm wondering about Yud He Vav He. Where does he come from as a deity? Was he used before? Because you might have caught that archaeological evidence dug up has spotted some terms like El Elyon, El Betel, and so forth, and Yud He Vav He, and so forth. So these terms were already in use at the time. What I'm saying is that the writer or writers of the five books of Moses took Yud He Vav He and Elohim and revolutionized their context, used them as used their terms with, basically created a new religion out of the names of gods in the pantheons, Ugaritic pantheon and Canaanite pantheon, and so forth. And that might tie in with this concept of which I don't think happened, at least not in the way that the Torah explains it. The five books of Moses explains it, but this taking of Canaan, conquering of Canaan, and knocking down their Asherim and Asherot, and so forth. I think that's metaphorical. I think this is writing after the fact. I think it's metaphorical for tearing down the old ways, and this is the new setup. So that's why I'm not really mad at this god and so forth, Yud He Vav He or Elohim or whatever. It's metaphorical. Um, okay, so I'm going to look into this further. Egyptian topographical lists referencing Yahoo among Shasu Bedouin in the Edom Seir region. External non-biblical evidence predates Israel and Canaan. From what I've gathered, Yud He Vav He may have been a deity, or at least it's a deity of the Midianites. Jethro is a Midianite priest, and he seems very connected with Yud He Vav He. So I'm guessing that Yud He Vav He originally actually archaeologically came from this Edom Seir region south of Israel. And so forth. And also in Psalms, many of the Psalms, or several of the Psalms anyway, seem to have not used or not characterized Yud He Vav He nor Elohim in a sense as they're characterized in the five books of Moses, so much as characterize them the way the Canaanites and Ugaritic community had them. So I think the writer of Psalms, or writers of Psalms probably, were repurposing old Canaanite Ugaritic hymn material, or Ugaritic material, and that the writer of the five books of Moses was doing something totally different from that. In contrast, was taking those terms Yud Hey Vav Hey and Elohim and repurposing them with entirely different, new context. So I hope you've been able to follow that. Sorry if this seems a little jumbled up. I'm working on a documentary. I'm scripting it now, or I'm going to soon script it. I'm kind of organizing this now, and this helped me organize that. So, um, all right. Hope you have a good day so far, and I'll talk with you soon. Bye.